Buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving deep into a topic that's sure to raise some eyebrows. We're taking a look at Hulda Clark's book, The Cure for All Cancers.
This book definitely presents some out there ideas about cancer, and it sparked a lot of debate.
Yeah, Clark, who had a PhD and was also a doctor of naturopathy, basically said all cancers are caused by the same thing. And get this, she claimed they can all be cured the same way, too.
A pretty bold claim.
Totally. And she doesn't just lay out theories, she goes all in. You'll find case studies, instructions for her methods, and even a DIY guide to build something she called a synchrometer. She said it could detect things like parasites and toxins, even super tiny ones.
It's important to remember, though, that Clark's views aren't really accepted by most doctors or scientists. Her work has been met with a lot of skepticism.
Right. And we're not here to say whether she's right or wrong. Our goal is just to explore the ideas in her book and let you decide what to make of it all.
Think of it as an intellectual adventure. We're going to lay out the map, and you can choose whether or not to follow the path.
Exactly. So where do we even begin with this cancer conspiracy? Clark has this whole theory about what causes cancer. What's at the heart of it all?
Well, the main villain in Clark's story is a parasite. And not just any parasite, the human intestinal fluke.
A parasite, hold on, don't those usually just stay in, the intestines? How's that connected to cancer everywhere in the body?
That's the key to her whole theory. She claimed that this specific type of fluke, Fasciolopsis busci, can actually migrate to other organs in the body.
Okay, now that's starting to sound a little scary. So these tiny parasites are traveling around and setting up shop and starting to cause cancer.
You got it. Clark believed that once these flukes get into other organs, they multiply like crazy, and that's what triggers the development of cancer.
Huh, interesting. But it doesn't stop there, right? I feel like I remember reading something about isopropyl alcohol being involved too. That's kind of strange.
It might seem like an odd connection, but Clark was convinced that isopropyl alcohol plays a big role in this whole process. She thought it weakens the body's defenses, making it easier for the flukes to escape from the intestines and spread everywhere.
So the alcohol is like giving the flukes a free pass to travel around.
You could say that. And what's even more concerning is that Clark believed isopropyl alcohol is everywhere, like it's hiding in plain sight. Shampoo, cleaning products, processed foods, even some drinking water. You name it, she probably said it had isopropyl alcohol in it.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. Okay, so let's say we're trying to avoid this cancer conspiracy. Is it enough to just ditch the isopropyl alcohol?
Clark would say absolutely not. She had this whole 3-step program she called The Cure. It's way more intense than just avoiding a few products.
Oh, I'm intrigued now. Okay, what's the first step in this cure?
Step 1 is her herbal parasite program. She believed it could wipe out those intestinal flukes. She had a specific recipe using things like black walnut, hull tincture, wormwood, and cloves.
And I'm guessing it's not a one-time thing.
Nope, not at all. She said you had to repeat it regularly to prevent reinfection, which she believed was pretty common. But the parasite cleanse is just the beginning.
Okay, what's next on the agenda? What else is part of Clark's cure?
This one's going to sound pretty intense. Clark insisted that you have to remove all metal and plastic dental work. Fillings, crowns, root canals, the whole 9 yards.
Seriously? All dental work? I mean, isn't that going to be, super disruptive? And what about any damage it might cause?
Yeah, it's definitely a controversial idea, and I'm sure most dentists would strongly disagree. Clark's thinking was that these materials harbor bacteria and toxins, and that those contribute to cancer.
So she's saying even the things we use to face our teeth could be part of this whole cancer conspiracy.
Right. She thought it was a hidden danger lurking in our mouths.
Yeah.
And it didn't stop at fillings and crowns. Clark claimed almost all crowns have hidden infections that are impossible to clean. She thought any tooth with a crown needed to be pulled.
Wow, that's a lot. It's hard to wrap my head around going to such extremes based on her theories. But I guess if you really buy into her cancer conspiracy, then it starts to make sense.
It definitely shows how far outside mainstream thinking her ideas were.
All right, so far we've got this intense parasite cleanse and the radical dental work removal. What's the third part of her cure? What else did she think we need to do to combat this cancer conspiracy?
The final step is all about diet. Clark was a huge advocate for a chemical-free, malonate-free diet.
Okay, back up a second. Melanate-free. What even is malonic acid?
It's a compound found in a lot of foods, especially processed ones. And Clark believed it messed with some really important processes at the cellular level. She said it creates an environment where tumor cells can thrive.
So it's not directly causing cancer, but it's making the body more susceptible to it?
Exactly. She saw it as setting the stage for those intestinal flukes to come in and really cause trouble.
Got it. So what can you actually eat on this cancer conspiracy diet? What does she recommend?
It's a pretty strict diet, I have to say. You can have fresh, whole, unprocessed foods, especially fruits, vegetables, and fish. But meat, other than fish and seafood, is a no-go.
So, like a seafood vegetarian, that's a new one. But I'm sure there's more to it than just swapping out steak for salmon. What about cooking methods?
Clark had opinions on that too. She didn't like grilling or broiling. She thought they created cancer-causing compounds.
No backyard barbecues then. Bummer. Okay, so we've got this three-pronged approach. Parasite cleanse, dental work removal, and this super strict diet. She really saw cancer as a big puzzle with all these connected pieces. But is there anything else to this cancer conspiracy? Did she call out any other villains?
Oh, there's more, for sure. She had a whole list of other things she thought contributed to cancer development, but I think we'll save that for the next part of our deep dive. So we've talked about the intestinal fluke and isopropyl alcohol being like the main players in Clark's cancer theory. But like any good conspiracy, there's got to be a bigger network involved, right?
Right. A whole supporting cast of villains kind of lurking in the shadows, helping things along. So who else made it onto Clark's list of suspects?
Well, one that might surprise you is malonic acid.
Malonic acid. That sounds like something from a chemistry textbook. Not exactly something you'd find at the grocery store.
That's what I thought too. But Clark argued that it's actually in a ton of common foods, especially processed stuff.
So it's hiding in plain sight. Sneaky. But what's the problem with malonic acid? How does it fit into all of this?
Clark believed that malonic acid messes with important processes, down at the cellular level. And she said that creates the perfect environment for tumor cells to, take root and flourish.
So it's not directly causing cancer, but it's making the body more vulnerable, kind of setting the stage.
Exactly. It's like laying down the welcome mat for those intestinal flukes to move in and start causing real trouble.
Okay, so malonic acid is like an accomplice to the main villain. Who else is on Clark's most wanted list?
Heavy metals were a big one for her. She was especially concerned about the metals found in dental work. Mercury, nickel, cobalt, stuff like that.
Ah, this goes back to her thing about removing all dental work.
Right.
She thought those metals could, leach out and cause all sorts of problems.
Exactly. And she didn't think they just stayed in your mouth either. Clark argued that heavy metals could build up in different organs and, contribute to tumor formation.
So it's not just about the local effects, but also the potential for these metals to wreak havoc throughout the entire body. But I gotta ask, isn't this view on dental work pretty controversial? Most dentists probably don't agree with that.
No, it's definitely not a mainstream view. Most dental organizations and, regulatory bodies maintain that things like dental amalgams are safe.
Oh.
But in Clark's world, heavy metals were a definite no-no.
Right. Okay, so we've got malonic acid and heavy metals as part of this supporting cast of villains. Who else is in Clark's rogues gallery of cancer contributors?
Oh, there are more for sure. Clark talked about bacteria, fungi, even those mycotoxins, the toxic substances produced by some fungi.
Whoa, it's like a whole ecosystem of bad guys that could be playing a role in cancer. Which ones was she most concerned about?
She specifically called out Clostridium bacteria, which is commonly found in the gut. And then there are certain types of fungi that produce a substance called patulin. She thought that was a big problem.
Patulin, yeah, I remember reading about that. Didn't she link that to the parathyroid gland?
Yes. She observed that patulin often showed up in the parathyroids of her cancer patients, and she thought it interfered with the body's natural defenses against tumors.
So it's not just the direct effects of these microorganisms, but also their potential to weaken the body's ability to fight back against cancer.
Exactly. It was all part of this interconnected web of factors that she believed contributed to a breakdown in the body's defenses.
Okay, so we gotta watch out for those little guys. Anything else we should be on the lookout for?
Well, she also warned about other solvents besides isopropyl alcohol. Benzene was one that she called out a lot.
Benzene. Isn't that pretty serious stuff? Where'd she find that?
Oh, she claimed to have detected it in all kinds of everyday things. Processed foods, drinks, cosmetics, even some supplements.
Wow, starting to feel like we need a hazmat suit just to walk down the street. It sounds like she's painting a pretty bleak picture here.
Yeah, that was kind of her point. She thought we live in the super toxic world and that even tiny amounts of these toxins can build up and, contribute to all kinds of problems. including cancer.
It's like she's saying we're under constant attack. So how did she explain how all of this is actually connected to cancer? Like, what's the missing link?
Well, for Clark, it always came back to the intestinal fluke. She said that when it gets into other organs, it starts producing this substance called orthophosphotyrosine.
Orthophosphotyrosine, that's a mouthful. What is that exactly, and why was it so important to her theory?
Think of it like a growth factor, someone that tells cells to divide. Clark thought that when this intestinal fluke releases orthophosphotyrosine in other organs, it basically triggers out-of-control cell growth. And that, of course, is the hallmark of cancer.
So it's like orthophosphotyrosine is the fuel that makes the whole cancer engine run.
That's a great way to put it. She saw it as the key link between the parasite and the development of tumors.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But how did those other things we talked about, like malonic acid, heavy metals, and the other solvents, play a role?
Clark thought those things acted as catalysts. They basically created a more favorable environment for the intestinal fluke to do its thing. Like, they helped it to thrive and produce more of that growth factor, the orthophosphotyrosine.
So they're all working together like a team to weaken the body, and then bam, the parasite takes hold and starts fueling tumor growth. It's a pretty complex theory. But did she have any actual evidence to back all of this up? I mean, we've talked about her case studies, but did she do any actual research?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's a big part of why her work is so controversial. She claimed that her findings were based on a ton of testing she did using a device she invented called the syncrometer.
Oh yeah, the syncrometer. We mentioned that earlier. It was this electronic device that she said could detect all sorts of things. Parasites, toxins, even diseases, like at a microscopic level. But was it, an actual scientific instrument?
That's the big question. Clark gives detailed instructions in her book on how to build and use a syncrometer. But it's never been scientifically validated. In fact, a lot of scientists have questioned whether it even works.
So it's more like a DIY science project than a real medical diagnostic tool?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem when it comes to evaluating Clark's work. She relied on the syncrometer for most of her research. But because it's not a recognized scientific instrument, it's really hard to take her findings at face value.
It's like trying to build a house on a foundation that might be made of, like cardboard. You don't know if it's going to hold up.
Exactly. And that's the tricky thing about trying to understand Clark's work. She used her own methods and her own tools, and they operated outside of, normal science.
So even if some of her observations were accurate, it's pretty much impossible to prove or disprove them using the traditional methods of scientific inquiry.
Right. And that lack of scientific rigor has led to a lot of people just dismissing her work as anecdotal, interesting stories, but not real evidence.
I can see why medical professionals would be hesitant to buy into this. They're trained to use treatments that are backed by science, and Clark's approach is way outside of that box. But what about those case studies she shared? Didn't those offer any support for her methods?
Clark definitely pointed to those case studies as evidence for her approach.
Yeah, and some of them were pretty dramatic, like people with really serious cancers going into remission.
Right. But it's important to remember that those case studies are just anecdotal. They're individual stories, and they don't really meet the standards of scientific evidence.
That makes sense. It's like trying to say that everyone who wears glasses is smart. Sure, you might know a few people who fit that description, but it doesn't mean it's true for everyone.
Exactly. There are all sorts of factors that could have contributed to the outcomes in those case studies. It's impossible to say for sure that it was Clark's methods that made the difference.
Okay, so where does that leave us? We've talked about Clark's theories, her methods, and why a lot of people don't take her work seriously. What are we supposed to make of all this?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be critical, but also open-minded. It's clear that her research has some serious limitations, but her ideas are still worth considering.
Right. It's all about finding that balance. We don't have to accept everything she said as fact, but we can still appreciate the fact that she was thinking outside the box.
Exactly. Maybe there's a kernel of truth in there somewhere, or maybe it's all just a bunch of bunk. But either way, it's a fascinating journey to explore these ideas and see where they lead.
Totally agree. So what's next on our agenda?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already, but we haven't talked about how Clark actually applied these ideas in real life. She had specific recommendations for, how to implement her cure.
Oh yeah, she didn't just lay out theories. She gave practical advice, like specific instructions for her parasite cleanse and her diet plan.
Right, and that's where things get really interesting, because her recommendations are, well, let's just say they're not for the faint of heart.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued now. Let's dive into those details.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground with Hulda Clark's ideas about cancer. We've talked about those intestinal flukes, the isopropyl alcohol, the malonic acid, all those heavy metals, the bacteria and fungi, the other solvents. It's a lot to keep track of.
It really is. Her theory is definitely complex, to say the least.
Totally. Yeah. But I think it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty. How did Clark say people could actually put her ideas into practice?
Right. She didn't just want to diagnose the problem. She wanted to offer a solution. And that's where her 3-step cure comes in. Yeah, we touched on the 3 steps before the parasite cleanse, the dental work removal, and the super strict diet. But I'm ready to hear the specifics. What did she actually recommend people do?
Okay, so let's start with that parasite cleanse. Clark had this very precise recipe using black walnut whole tincture, wormwood, and cloves. She was adamant about following the dosage and timing very carefully.
I bet. She seemed like someone who was all about precision and like doing things exactly her way.
Oh, absolutely. And she didn't think this was a one-and-done kind of thing either. She recommended repeating the cleanse pretty regularly, like every few weeks, to prevent reinfection. She was convinced those flukes were everywhere, just waiting to sneak back in.
Makes sense, I guess. If you truly believe that parasites are the root of all cancer, you'd want to do everything you could to keep them at bay. Okay, so that's the parasite cleanse. What about the dental work? I have to admit, I'm still a little stuck on that one.
Yeah, that one's definitely hard to swallow for a lot of people. But Clark was really serious about it. She believed that any metal or plastic in your mouth was a potential source of toxins that could fuel cancer.
So fillings, crowns, bridges, all that good stuff had to go.
Basically. She even said that most crowns harbor hidden infections that can't be cleaned. So she recommended extracting any teeth with crowns just to be safe.
Wow, that's a lot. I can only imagine how disruptive and, well, painful that process would be. Not to mention expensive.
Yeah, it's definitely a drastic measure. And it goes without saying that most dentists would strongly advise against it. But Clark believed it was absolutely essential for preventing and treating cancer.
It's clear that she wasn't afraid to challenge conventional wisdom. Okay, so we've got the parasite cleanse and the dental work removal. What about that super strict diet? Fill me in on the details.
All right, get ready to say goodbye to processed foods, sugar, and pretty much anything that comes in a box or a bag. Clark's diet was all about fresh, whole, unprocessed foods.
Sounds pretty healthy, actually. Lots of fruits and veggies, I'm guessing.
Definitely. And she was a big fan of fish. She called it a seafood vegetarian diet. You could eat fish and seafood, but no other meat.
Interesting. No chicken, no beef, no pork.
Yeah.
That's pretty restrictive. But I guess if you're trying to avoid all those toxins and malonic acid, it makes sense to stick to the basics.
Right. And she wasn't just concerned about what you ate, but also how you cooked it. Grilling and broiling were off limits. She thought they created carcinogenic compounds.
So it's steamed veggies and baked fish from now on. No more barbecue parties, huh?
You got it. It was definitely a strict regimen, but Clark believed it was crucial for maintaining a healthy body and preventing cancer.
Okay, so that's the 3-pronged approach. The parasite cleanse, the dental work removal, and the super strict diet. It's pretty intense, I have to say. But I'm curious, what did Clark say about the effectiveness of her cure? Did she offer any evidence that it actually worked?
Well, she definitely pointed to her case studies as proof that her methods could produce remarkable results. She shared stories of people with various types of cancer who saw significant improvement, even complete remission, after following her program.
Yeah, I remember those case studies. Some of them were pretty amazing. But we've talked about how anecdotal evidence isn't really reliable, right? It's hard to say for sure whether those positive outcomes were actually due to Clark's methods or something else entirely.
Exactly, and it's one of the biggest criticisms of her work. There's really no way to know if her treatments were truly effective or if those people would have gotten better anyway.
Plus, there's the whole issue of the syncrometer. That was her main tool for diagnosing and monitoring her patients, but it's never been validated by the scientific community, so it's hard to take any of her findings at face value.
Right, and that's why Clark's work remains so controversial. Her theories are interesting and definitely thought-provoking, but they lack that solid scientific backing.
I see what you mean. It's a tough spot to be in. On the one hand, her ideas challenge us to think differently about cancer and maybe even question some of the assumptions of conventional medicine. But on the other hand, without that scientific evidence, it's hard to know what to believe.
It is, and that's why it's so important to be a critical thinker, especially when it comes to health information. We have to weigh the evidence, consider the source, and be wary of anything that sounds too good to be true.
Well said. So, what's the bottom line for our listeners? What should they take away from all of this?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed and to be an active participant in your own health journey. Do your research, ask questions, and don't be afraid to challenge conventional wisdom. But always make decisions based on the best available evidence and in consultation with qualified healthcare professionals.
That's great advice. Don't just blindly follow anyone's theories, even if they sound convincing. Think critically, do your homework, and make informed choices.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, even if you don't agree with everything you hear, there's always value in exploring different perspectives and expanding your knowledge.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Hulda Clark. It's been a fascinating, if not a little bit controversial, journey.
It certainly has. And who knows, maybe it sparks some new questions and ideas for our listeners to explore. That's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely. Until next time, stay curious, keep those minds open, and don't be afraid to dive deep into the unknown.